Hello, everyone, and welcome to the With Chinese Characteristics podcast. I'm Natalie.
I'm Cherry.
Together we talk about topics with Chinese characteristics. Had a little burp there.
Whatever those may be. I'll finish the sentence.
Whatever those might be. And today we're talking about the man, the myth, the legend, Judge Dee.
Yes. Sorry, I signed there because we talk about a lot of the man, the legend. But we
only
have some...
Only Ren Shikai.
Only Ren
Shikai.
Well, we
Ren
talk about
Shikai and Judge
San.
Dee. It's a...
So you only use that opening for those two?
Yeah, those are the only two people
Okay.
who've made it to that category.
Gotcha. Well, we do have the woman, the legend herself.
Next week?
Next week.
Yeah.
So, stay tuned.
Yeah.
I won't give it away.
Judge Dee,
Yeah.
Ren Shikai has an impressive mustache. Judge Dee also has an impressive facial hair. So
Okay. Well, we don't know. We have pictures.
that's true. We have wood blocks of Judge Dee.
Okay. All right.
Well, anyway, so I'm just gonna get straight into it.
Sure.
So, Judge Dee, real historical figure. Sure, we'll talk about that in a second.
Okay.
But in the early 1940s, Robert Van Gulik was a man with a problem, a Dutch Orientalist by trade.
That was a job title
That's
back in the days.
One job for the entire Orient, Cherry.
Mm-hmm.
It's all the same. The Second World War was causing serious issues for a man of his profession. He couldn't be in Japan. He couldn't be in China, so he needed something to do with his time. He decided to use this time to translate a Chinese novel he had picked up some years earlier, 4 Great Strange Cases of Empress Wu's Reign. We'll talk about Empress Wu in a second too. Believed to be written by an anonymous author in the 1700s, the novel describes the famous Tang Dynasty magistrate and statesman Judge Dee, or Dee Renjie. The novel consisted of 2 parts, and Van Gulik decided to use the first half to create the celebrated cases of Judge Dee, which he published a translated version of 1949. Into English. So there's some back and forth about the novel is in 2 parts, and he thinks that the later part of the novel was written, or the second half of the novel was written later, but the original part with the Judge Dee at the beginning, is much earlier.
Okay.
The novel describes Judge Dee in the role of a district magistrate, solving crimes and dispensing judgment. In fact, these type of detective novels have a centuries-long history in China, long predating Western fiction such as Sherlock Holmes. Van Gulik went on to create several more novels with this fictional version of Dee, all originally meant for the Chinese and Japanese market, later translated into English. Despite being original works, they borrow many plot elements from older Chinese detective stories in order to remain true to the source genre. Today, though, we're mainly focusing on the original novel as a historical artifact of Imperial China, and an exploration of justice and governance at the local scale. Also, it's very entertaining. So entertaining that we're not going to spoil the solution to all the cases because I think you guys should read it.
It's readily available in English. We'll put a link down below.
Ironically,
So
Cherry looked at the original Chinese version.
Yeah, this is where you're gonna announce my shame.
Oh yeah, but
to the audiences.
But it's actually probably more accessible in English at this point than it is in Chinese, because the Chinese translation is still not Chinese translation, but the Chinese version is still, I think it's all like ancient Chinese basically.
So his books has made their way back to China, and there are modern translated versions of it, but I wanted to go back to the original text where he translated from. But that was in Wenyan, the much more traditional form of written Chinese. And it's a bit hard to go through. So I opted to read the English book first, and then there are parts where this is interesting. What did we say in Chinese? I'll go back to the original text and find it. But I was my reading experience was based off the English version.
In some ways, probably some of the modern pop culture versions of Judge Dee in China today are based off of Van Gulik stuff.
Oh, they are. We're gonna get into it later.
And people might not even realize that, but
I don't know how well known it is.
But it's sort of a weird situation.
I think it's a great situation. I think it's a great example of how culture and
is not owned by anyone.
It's fluid. Well, wow.
Wow.
No.
Multiculturalism.
Yes.
Robert Van Gulik.
I know. Well, but it's also to say that the same cultural legacy can be adopted and loved sincerely by different people from different cultures.
Oh yeah, no, 100%. Do you know the term? The term for somebody who likes Judge Dee is?
What? There's a term for it? No, there's a specific word.
Yeah.
What is it?
A devotee.
Okay. Okay, did you make that up?
No, I read something else, and it's like devotees might be interested to find out.
Oh my god. Okay.
Okay. So
I didn't know that.
By the end of this podcast,
devotee.
You might become a devotee.
You might. Okay. I might. Yeah.
So tell us about the historical figure, Cherry.
Okay. So Judge Dee, Di Renjie, the actual person in history. Okay. So obviously he's got, like all Chinese men, Asian Chinese men, they have multiple names, versus Chinese women have no name. But Di Renjie is what we know, his most famous known name. So I'm just going to refer to him as that, or Judge Dee. So he was born during the Tang Dynasty in 630, born into a common family of government administrators. So nothing too fancy, but not a, like a farmer's family either, which means he was meant to be educated and to take the literacy test and continue the path of his father and his grandfather to work in the government. So he moved around a lot during his childhood, following his father's various government posts in different areas of China. And he was the oldest of 5 sons. Not sure about daughters. The historical, like the records I can find don't say 5 children, so it's okay. Daughters don't count, apparently. But he loved reading since he was little, and he took a special interest in medicine. So this was mentioned, I think, a lot because this was supposedly very rare amongst the students of literature at the time, because the imperial exam does not test you on medical knowledge. Yeah, it's not part of the Confucian belief that or anything that's related that's going to be immediately useful.
And that's going to be a reoccurring criticism, especially when we get into like the part we've talked about more, like the 1800s, where it's like none of these Chinese officials know anything because you don't have any time to learn anything besides the stuff you need to pass the exam.
Yes, exactly. So, this was meant, but, I would say if you read the book or, if you continue to listen to this podcast, you will realize that the special interest they took in medicine does pay off, at least in the fictional versions of his stories.
Yeah.
So after his first official posting, because, of course, he passed the exam, he was falsely accused of something by another government official of the same level, which we don't know what he was accused of, something bad, which had triggered an investigation. Eventually, his name was cleared, but the higher government official who investigated him was so impressed that he even apologized to Judge Dee in person and praised him, calling him a pearl and a missed treasure. So after his first official posting, because of course he passed the exam, he was falsely accused of something which was not recorded in history. We don't know what it is, by another government official. He had to undergo an investigation. And the reason I bring this up is because, of course, first, his name was cleared. But second, the higher government official who investigated him was so impressed with, the man himself, the talent, the political achievements. He even apologized to Di Renjie in person and praised him, calling him a pearl and a missed treasure. After that, with this higher government official's recommendation and help, he moved up in the political system. And really, if you look at his career, he had a very long political career, and he was a career administrator. And we now call him Judge Dee, but he was never a judge. It's not that's not a job. He was just a government administrator. However, at this time,
judging is one of the tasks.
Judging is one of the tasks he's got to do.
And I think it's part of the thing that, is supposed to make him special is that, district magistrate is the lowest rung on the ladder. Yeah. And a lot of officials are just going to treat it as a stepping stone. Like, I just got to get through my 3 years or however many places, not cause any problems. Yeah. And then I get to the higher level, and then I no longer have to do all this busy work. Yeah. But I think Judge Dee took it very seriously. Yeah. He was really doing the work. Yeah. Yeah. So he was famous for his detective work and his judgment of criminal cases as part of his job. And he was, efficient. Cases got moved along. He was fair. Not many complaints.
that is not to say, his political career didn't have any obstacles. After all, this was the Chinese imperial system we're talking about. And corruption was a default, which if you read the novel, they don't even like raise an eyebrow. Well, they just treat it as part of the system.
Well, the funny part is, so Tang Dynasty is almost like China's like Rome.
Yeah.
Where the later next 1,000 years, everyone goes, oh man, the Tang Dynasty, they really had it figured out during the Tang Dynasty.
Yeah.
But
how do we return to the glory days?
Yeah. But even this guy 1,000 years later, writing about the Tang Dynasty, he still just assumes it's going to be corrupt.
Yeah.
Because it's like, well, of course.
Of course it's going to be. There's going to be a quote-unquote acceptable level, default known level of corruption in the system, but it still works. Yeah. That's their belief anyways. So some people might...
Well, the one person who can't be corrupt, there's one person who, if the district magistrate is corrupt, then the whole system falls apart.
Yes.
So there can be a certain level of corruption, but except if you're the district magistrate, but obviously.
But everyone else in the system, the prison guard, the local, like lower levels of
officials, well, not even officials, like employees, basically.
They're gonna get something out of the system, and it's understood. It's not a big deal. So anyhow, there was a balance to be struck. There was a balance to be struck, and muddy waters to navigate a lot of the times, and especially for Di Renjie during his career, because he was born in 630 and he passed away in 704. And these years, you talked about the Empress Wu Zetian of China. So she was the only legitimate female sovereign in the history of China. There's obviously Cixi and various other powerful women in history. Tsai Ing-wen, yes, exactly. No, Tsai Ing-wen is official.
Yeah, it's China. Yeah. It's Republic of China.
Yes. Sovereign, though, is not a sovereign.
No, I guess not.
A president is different than a sovereign. Thank God. So, there's a difference there. But anyhow, so she was, she ruled first through her husband, the Empress Gaozong, and then through two of her sons that became empress later. And then eventually she declared herself a new dynasty, the Wuzhou dynasty, in 690. So obviously a lot of shifting winds in the high court, and Di Renjie as a government official gets caught up in it sometimes. Because eventually always turned out fine though for him.
Because eventually he became an imperial, like he wasn't a. Like
he moved up.
Yeah, he moved into the capital.
Yes, and then it's during her reign that he really rose to his highest positions multiple times. Yeah. So as he navigated the muddy waters, he became more and more famous, both in court and amongst the people. So he then passed away in 704 from what I can find, diseases, which was, to say a peaceful ending. Yeah. 74 years old for a government official that famous, not very common at the time. Yeah.
So
that's the history of the judge.
Okay. Yeah. So given he's famous, he is a common character.
He's famous.
Yeah, given he's famous, he's a common character in these detective stories. Yes. And I say detective kind of in quotes because they're not a detective. They're more like court judgment dramas.
Well, he's most famous for, that's where the drama is.
Yes.
There's a lot of other aspects of Judge Dee's work that doesn't get advertised in the books.
No, it's not going to write a novel about him.
But we're here to talk about the literature version.
Yes. So these stories, Judge Dee or otherwise, have a long history in China because this role of district magistrate, this imperial system, this imperial court system has a long history as well. Yeah. And people like writing stories about it. And these are for entertainment. They can be historical, quote unquote, people describing what happened, but they can also be educational for if you're a young magistrate. Yeah. Confucius isn't going to say how you investigate a crime. No. But you can read these novels and get ideas about, how you're supposed to solve things and look at stuff. Yeah.
Well, you don't just have to read the novels. There were history written about him too. I know. You read those as well.
But I mean, part of your... but these are, you got to have a... So
these are more entertaining.
Yeah, you got to have an excuse. Yeah. I'm reading these Judge Dee books. I'm reading these novels. These detective stories. For professional growth.
But if you're the people reading these, you're supposed to almost get life lessons out of it. Yeah. Because there's a lot of, unlike like Sherlock Holmes, there's a lot of like moral judgment.
There's a lot of moralizing.
And a lot of like lectures in it for everyday people of China, like how you should behave, especially if you're a woman.
A lot of rules.
Follow these rules. Otherwise,
I kind of suspect that these imperial ancient Chinese people have some weird views about women, Cherry. I'm not 100% sure.
Oh, really? It wasn't obvious? Yeah, it was very subtle how they treat women. Yeah, totally.
So let's talk about the genre as a whole. And some of this is drawn from Van Gulik's translation notes and his comments.
He wrote long translation notes.
As
an Orientalist,
yes.
He had a lot of thoughts about.
Yeah. So if you get the printed version of the book, it does have lots of translation notes, lots of preface, lots of his thoughts after reading, all of hundreds of stories.
Can we just call him an East Asian study specialist?
We're gonna call him an Orientalist.
No, oh my God.
That's what he calls himself. Cherry.
I know, but it was a product of the time. It was.
Why, you start to like Van Gulik now? You don't want him to be an Orientalist?
I don't.
Okay, look up. Van Gulik, as an East Asian studies specialist, talks about it. So he says scholar.
Yeah.
So he says there's 5 things that typically make up a Chinese detective novel that's different from like Sherlock Holmes or later Western ones.
Okay.
So it's almost always a district magistrate, not like a private eye or like a police detective, because those don't really exist.
Yeah.
Who's the lowest imperially appointed official in the empire. A district is, a large walled town and, maybe 50 miles around it, somewhere around 100,000 people.
Which is a lot of people.
Yes.
Even though if it's the lowest level of...
Yes. Right? That's a lot of people for one guy to be a handle of. So the magistrate is judge, detective, jury, and executioner for almost all crimes in the entire population.
No separation of power
whatsoever. Separation of power. It all goes to them.
Not a thing.
And they obviously have people under them. They have guards and jail keepers and stuff like that. But in the end...
Judge Dee doesn't do the arrest himself.
No, but in the end, all the power is vested in Judge Dee. They all get their power from the
him. From the magistrate.
Yes. The criminal is often described ahead of time, apparently. So sort of think like Columbo, if you've seen Columbo.
Yeah.
But in this Judge Dee story, they're not described ahead of time.
So there's a suspension of...
Yeah.
Suspense?
There's some suspense.
Please delete that. There's the suspense.
Yeah. There's supernatural elements involved usually.
Okay.
There tends to be lots of characters and interactions and cases all mixed up during the same time period that the judge has to solve all together.
Can we just go back to the supernatural element?
Yeah.
That's rare in, I guess that is rare in Western detective novels.
In Western detective novels, I'm thinking of like Scooby-Doo or something. It's not really a detective novel, but like...
Sherlock Holmes.
I know, but a lot of times in Western detective novels, the criminals will try and make it seem like something supernatural happened.
Right, but
and
turns
then the
out
detective
it's just a trick.
sees through it, right? And goes, "Oh, okay, it was really they did this little trick, and people thought it was a ghost."
Maybe if supernatural elements are introduced into the novel, it becomes a different genre.
Yeah,
it's no longer a detective novel in the West.
Yeah, part of the traditional detective novel is dispelling the supernatural with science. But Judge Dee, no, there's just some supernatural stuff going on. And they typically describe the punishments and the outcomes of the events. So it's not just enough to say they got arrested for murder. They have to go, and then they were convicted to be executed in this way. And then everybody came and watched, and then this is what they did. And then
gruesome detail.
In gruesome detail. And then they sold all their stuff, and then this lady got this much, and then this guy got that much. And then Judge Dee takes this much of a cut. So it's all...
For the government. He doesn't take the cut for himself.
Yeah. Well, for the government. So people want to know, what happened, right?
Yeah. Well, part of the justice, I guess, is in the result and of the aftermath of the case. So it's more than a detective novel, really. Yeah,
it's the whole how the sausage is made of justice from the start to the end.
The Chinese version of
the
justice
Chinese
at
version.
The time. Yeah.
Because again, it's all one guy. Like Sherlock Holmes doesn't get to decide what somebody is sentenced.
No.
Right? He doesn't get to decide what you do with their estate if you sell it, as damages.
No. He's not even part of the police force.
No.
He's a consultant.
Sometimes they don't believe him.
No. No, they don't.
No. Judge Dee does it. This is ultimate power. With some exceptions, as we'll see.
He does get challenged at times.
Oh, yeah.
And he has to navigate that, which is interesting.
Yeah. So we'll talk about the novel.
Okay.
So we start off with a prologue of the novel itself, written, again, probably by this anonymous 18th century author. Mm-hmm. They describe the role of a local magistrate and how that official is all that stands between a perfectly ordered Confucian society and total chaos.
The good dictator
yeah, they have
theory.
to be kind of like a philosopher king.
Yeah.
And I quote, "The honesty of the magistrate does not only consist of negative qualities, like not accepting bribes and not doing harm to the people. It also implies positive qualities, such as, in serving the state, doing what others cannot or dare not do, and ruling the people, rectifying wrongs that others cannot or dare not rectify. The subtle clues to be found among the populace and the complicated intrigues of the official world, all such things a judge should investigate impartially." So he's saying, you need to be an active judge. You need to, again, this is sort of instructional. You don't just, sit back and solve problems as they come to you.
Yeah.
You need to go out and...
Although in reality, that is how it works. Yeah. You sit back and let problems come to you. Yeah. And then you cover them up at times because you just don't want trouble.
No, Jerry. Not Judge Dee, though.
Not him, no.
Well, actually, it'll get him into some trouble, but we'll see.
Yeah.
So we get an introduction to Judge Dee, currently magistrate of Chongping, and his 4 associates. So the magistrate, they have a 3-year term.
Posting, yeah.
And they always get posted far away from where they were born to theoretically cut down on corruption. And because most of the staff, the local people in their area, it's like almost like, the people say the deep state. You show up in a new magistrate.
Yeah.
The servants are just part of the region. The guy who runs the jail, the guards, the
They've
person
got their own little
fixes
society.
the bridges. They've got their own societies, their own corruption, their own little
loyalty.
Their own little grifts on the side.
Yeah.
So you bring in your little crew that travels with you of people you can trust. And so Judge Dee has 4. He has Hong Liang, the sergeant of the tribunal, who's sort of like his confidant and his like old family servant.
His right hand.
Which I think is kind of a stock character in
all Chinese.
Yeah, like the trusted servant they can talk to.
The family servant, yeah.
Yeah.
Who's been with them since they were little.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tao Gao, a reformed swindler, and Ma Zhong and Qiao Tai, 2 brothers of the Green Woods.
Yeah.
Who
are
I just wanted to say that. Like reformed bandits.
Yeah.
That Judge Dee, he got robbed by them, but he convinced them with his,
he just talked them out of the
robbery. He talked them out of it and said, you should work for me instead.
Yeah. Made them change their life, path.
Yeah.
That's how good Judge Dee was.
And all these stories, no one's ever just a bandit because they like stealing stuff. They're like a bandit because they had some tragic backstory and they just need a good man to, bring them back on the straight and narrow.
It's all moral lectures and, we're not here to praise a talented thief.
Yeah.
Ever. Yeah.
But all of Judge Dee's, his guys, good at Kung Fu.
Yeah.
All of them are good at Kung Fu. Even his old family servant.
Yeah.
They're all good at Kung Fu.
Yeah.
Because, you might need to go rough some people up.
Mm-hmm. Which you often do in this novel.
Yep. There's a lot of fisticuffs. So things start with the banging of the gong outside the tribunal.
The banging of the gong.
The banging of the gong. So why don't you describe the banging of the gong, Cherry?
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know if I can. So the banging of the gong. The gong. The gong? The gong.
I think it's a drum sometimes, too. I don't know.
It could be a drum. It could be a gong. Yeah. Something that makes a loud noise. So it's basically an instrument that's placed in front of the government building in town. And how you basically submit a case, voice your whether you've been wronged or whatever, or if you think like there's a case that that needs the attention, you as a peasant, you go there and bang the gong. Yeah, and that's how you get the attention and report a case. In extreme cases, to the local official, because there's gonna be times when the court is open, then you can go and talk and report things.
Yeah.
Cry, kneel down, whatever, what you will. Mm-hmm. So when you go to the gong, though, that is the whole town will know. It is like, let it be known, let it be known. That happened, and then the judge, almost whatever they're doing, because again, it's not a judge. It's a government official.
They got to do taxes. They got to make sure the roads get repaired.
Yeah, they got to manage everything, every department, right? But they must drop what they do, right? And then they respond to the person that had, and hear them out
Yes.
when this happens.
And I think the implication is that if you're a peasant or, there's corruption or something, maybe the guards don't even let you in to see the judge if you don't give them a bribe.
Yeah.
Or, there could be something else going on. But again, as you said, the whole town hears if you bang the gong.
Yeah.
And then everybody is going to be like, oh, what's going on? And then the judge has to take it seriously.
Yeah.
But what they don't have to do is be nice.
No.
so we'll talk about it.
To either, to whoever, to the plaintiff,
yeah,
to the
defendant,
suspect,
to whoever.
no one. Yeah.
So there was a murder on a road in a kind of surrounding village.
One more thing.
Oh, yeah.
The Chinese judicial system at the time, it's very hard to navigate.
Yeah.
They make it as complicated as possible.
And you can't have a lawyer. There's no
lawyer.
lawyers.
There's no such thing as a lawyer.
Yeah.
The closest thing apparently was like people who write
pleas for you,
like who are literate, because not everyone can read and write. And they might word your complaints a certain way or your case a certain way so that the local magistrate will see it under a certain light.
But they can't speak for you in court.
But they can't speak for you in court. And it's also like people who do these, I think he talked about in his book, but people who do these jobs are like failed students of literature.
Yeah.
Like they would have taken the imperial exam. That's how they know how to read and write in a sophisticated manner, but they obviously didn't pass the test. Otherwise they wouldn't be doing this job.
Yeah.
So it is at times looked down, this lawyer-like closest thing to lawyer career. But yeah, the Chinese judicial system, very hard to navigate. So it's almost like a fast track. So it's almost like a fast track to just go bang the drum or the gong.
Yeah.
And
you're going to get a resolution in the next day or two. It might not be what you want, but
it could be long cases.
That's true, but
you're going to get some response to start to open a case.
Yes.
Usually. Yeah.
You get to talk to the manager. Bang the drum.
Yes, that's the Asian version of I want to speak to the manager.
So there was a murder on a road on a village outside of town. 2 guys were staying at an inn. They were silk merchants, and they were found dead on the road the next day.
This is the first case.
This is the first case.
Okay.
The guy who bangs the drum. And the local warden, who's kind of like a local sort of sheriff who keeps track of things and is supposed to send reports back to the magistrate, has accused the innkeeper of killing the 2 guys because they stayed at his inn the night before. And so the innkeeper was like, I didn't kill them, and freaks out, runs all the way to the district seat and bangs the gong on the tribunal. And so Judge Dee's annoyed because it's early in the morning and they're not coming at the official time. Part of the Chinese justice system is because, again, the magistrate's busy. They don't want to deal with these things. You have to be kneeling the whole time.
Yeah.
Even if you're the one who's accusing somebody else, if you accuse someone of something and they didn't do it, you get the punishment.
Yeah.
That you accuse them of.
Yeah. So you can't just accuse people for fun.
You can't just accuse people.
There's going to be consequences for you.
Yeah. It's not like the Cultural Revolution. You can't just accuse people for fun. That's
a good one.
Yeah. And, you got to be kneeling. If you say something out of turn, they'll beat you. The judge is going to say mean things to you.
Yeah.
So it's not fun. So nobody wants to go to the court.
Yeah.
Because as soon as you enter that room and you're in court mode,
it's not like you can just be, never mind.
Yeah. One wrong word and you're going to get beaten or worse. Okay. So Judge Dee talks to them both. He talks to the warden. He talks to the innkeeper. He says, you 2 have made conflicting statements. Without having held an inquest, I cannot proceed with this case. The investigation shall be continued after inspection of the scene of the crime. It's all very official.
Yeah. I was impressed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Judge Dee's like, I'm not going to take your word for it. So Judge Dee arrives, and he finds that the warden has moved the bodies from their original position on the road and placed them in front of the inn. Because
tampered with the crime scene.
He tampered with the crime scene, and he says, well, I know the innkeeper killed them, so I just moved them there because they were blocking the road. Judge Dee is not happy with this.
No.
He says, you dog's head. I am not... He calls everybody dog's head.
Yeah, whenever he's mad, you dog's head.
You dog's head. I am not asking to be advised by you as to the identity of the criminal. What I demand to know is, how can you, charged with an official function and supposed to know the rules and regulations, thus offend against the law? You ought to know what the punishment is for willfully moving dead bodies and thus tampering with important evidence. Now I shall first have you beaten with the heavy bamboo, then I shall question you under torture. Judge Dee ordered the constables to let Warden Pang have 100 strokes with the heavy bamboo. Then and there, Warden Pang's wails rose to heaven, and soon blood began to trickle from his bursting skin. So, a couple things here.
Yeah.
Again, they got to describe what happens.
Yeah.
2, the politeness only has to go one way. In a modern court, we think, oh, you have to be polite to the judge has to be polite to you.
Well,
more or less. There's a certain...
The judge doesn't call you dog's head.
No, the judge doesn't go, you stupid idiot.
Yeah.
But Judge Dee, 100%.
100%. All the time.
All the time. It's just like,
you little person. How dare you?
How dare you? And if you're not like, oh, your slave would like to, if you say anything out of turn, then you're in big trouble.
Yeah.
Also.
Or you do anything out of turn. Like tampering with a crime scene.
Yeah, then you're in big trouble.
Yeah.
So this is the heavy bamboo. There's also a light bamboo. The heavy bamboo is higher.
Okay.
And 100 strokes is the maximum.
So Judge Dee is really mad.
Judge Dee is really mad because he's an official person. He should know better. Apparently, they would even have sometimes the judges would just have like wooden like bamboo like sticks with the numbers on them. Yeah. And they would just throw them on the floor. Yeah. And then they have like the people at the tribunal would look at them, and then they just give the person that number of beatings. Yeah. So the judge
doesn't even have to say it.
Doesn't even have to say it. Just throws them on the floor. The warden is recovering. I think he like passes out because he gets beaten so many times. So judge.
So torture is not wrong, by the way, in this context.
No.
It's completely accepted. It's a useful method to be to enact in court. Yeah. For anyone, not just the suspect. So if you read the novel, you gotta get over that part.
Yeah, you gotta get over it. You gotta assume.
Or keep in mind,
Judge Dee is supposed to be doing a good moral thing by beating the warden in this context, because he's basically somebody could be charged with murder. Yeah. Because he's tampered with the crime scene.
Yes. Human rights is not a thing.
No, human rights is not a thing. So
criminals are not.
No. Judge Dee proceeds to investigate the inn, and he speaks to all of the guests, and he finds no evidence of the crime. Nobody says a struggle. Nobody says that the innkeeper was acting weird. He decides to stay the night at the hotel, and he tells his lieutenants to investigate quietly.
Right. At the inn. But
at the inn.
Hotel is fine. Sorry.
Yeah, hotel, inn, hostel, whatever. So Sergeant Hong goes drinking with the local guards, but he does not ask for any luxuries. And I think this is just saying something about how normally these officials of the magistrate act. He says, "We are not like ordinary constables who, as soon as they go somewhere to work on a case, immediately start gorging themselves with wine and food at their master's expense. And on top of that, demand a few pieces of silver from the inn to cover their traveling expenses. You bring only 2 dishes of plain food and give us each 2 cups of wine. That is all. We shall settle the bill later." So, we got to establish that even Judge Dee's lieutenants, when he's not watching them, they're all also very honorable, proper people and not corrupt. Yes. Like normal magistrate.
Yes. Lieutenant. Well, that's almost more important, as in like the default is that they are corrupt.
Yes.
And they're going to squeeze out free wine, free food.
Because what are you going to do, right? Because you're thinking like, oh man, if they get pissed off at me, I could get involved in a criminal case, right? Yes. He does wining and dining with the local guards. And he learns that, this is his Sergeant Hong, learns that the warden held a grudge against the innkeeper and was badly in debt due to gambling. Instead of submitting, and the warden basically like extorted the innkeeper for money and said, "I'm going to tell the magistrate that you murdered those people unless you give me like 200 silver or something." Yeah. But the innkeeper instead ran to bang the gong. So the next morning, the 2 corpses are investigated by the coroner, very official. Both died of knife wounds. However, upon close inspection, instead of the 2 young merchants that they think are supposed to be there, one is actually an old man. So there's a young man and an old man.
Curious.
So now Judge Dee goes, "What's up? I don't even know who was murdered now." Yeah. So he takes his frustration out on the warden. Yeah. He says, "You dog's head. Tamper with corpses and slander innocent people. You must have had ample opportunity for observing them. Now speak up quickly. What did they look like?" However, the warden had only seen the corpses dead. The innkeeper had only seen them alive. So nobody knows what's going on. Yeah. Annoyed, Judge Dee orders the constables to give the warden a second beating this time for making a false accusation.
Yeah.
Against the innkeeper. So they give him another 100 beatings. So the innkeeper, or not the innkeeper, the warden, they beat him another 100 times there on the floor of the thing.
The warden has not had any luck so far.
Yes.
Yeah.
So basically, Judge Dee has a working theory. He thinks there was 2 merchants. Mm-hmm. One of them murdered the other. Mm-hmm. And then they murdered another guy who was a witness, who was a local.
Yeah.
So we need to find
the guy that
that's not ran away.
Yeah.
Whose name is Xiao. So he sends his pet bandits, Tiao Tai and Ma Zhong, out to search for Xiao, this silk merchant. Mm-hmm. So while this happens, though, Judge Dee decides to go on a secret investigation. He dresses up as a traveling doctor, and he thinks, I'm going to walk around the town, see if anybody knows anything.
Yeah.
You know, I can't go out officially, but if I'm a doctor, I can talk to people normally. Of course, he knows medicine, as you talked about, as part of his history, and perhaps the murderer had injured themselves and would need treatment. Mm. This, however, starts up a second mystery, the case of the strange corpse, which we'll talk about briefly at the end.
Yeah.
But it's going to intertwine through the entire rest of the book, and you're going to go on and off as they kind of try and solve each case. Anyway, though, his pet bandits go and they kind of follow the trail, and they end up finding a guy named, kind of confusingly, Zhao. And it turns out that Xiao, the silk merchant, sold his silk to Zhao, gave him a made-up story, and basically sold it to Zhao, and then Zhao was supposed to sell the silk and like get money for it.
Let me just say that the closeness to the last names, it's not confusing to.
Yeah, I know.
It's not that confusing. It's just confusing.
It's confusing to me because I have a thick.
But it's not part of the story. Is not trying to make them confused.
Tongue, and I can't appreciate the 6 tones of
four
tones of Mandarin.
But it's not part of the story's feature to make them confusing.
No, they're just they have.
Although there are a lot of like deceptions in the stories, and
Judge Dee is dressing up as a doctor.
Exactly.
And going around the town and getting up to shenanigans.
Yeah.
So they found out there's a lot of back and forth. There's more. Judge Dee pretends to be a silk merchant.
Yeah.
There's all this little trickery.
Yeah.
And eventually they find out that Xiao ran off to a place called Turnip Pass. But there's no record on the map of a place called Turnip Pass.
Yeah.
And then eventually there's an old man working at the tribunal, and he's like, turnips? I love turnips. You guys should go to my village. We have the best turnips.
Yeah. Turnip Pass.
Yeah.
Instead of Turnip Pass.
It's Turnip Pass, like the root vegetable, which I don't know what the pun is in Chinese. Maybe it's better in Chinese.
They spent pages and pages to write about it.
In the Chinese version?
No, in the English version.
In the English version.
And the Chinese version, but I just,
It goes on for a while.
It goes on for a long time.
So mystery solved. We figured out where Turnip Pass is.
Yeah.
So Zhao is now part of the gang because he didn't have anything to do with the murder. Mm. So he goes off with the rest of them to Turnip Village to find Xiao.
Yeah.
They can't just arrest Xiao though, because the place is full of bandits.
Yeah.
So and it's in a neighboring district.
Yes.
So they think, how are we going to get this guy out?
And there's local military units stationed there. Mm-hmm. And they go into depth in discussing the military is probably getting a kickback from the local bandits.
Yes.
And, no one is to be trusted here.
Well, we'll talk about this, I think, partially, in the next episode. Mm-hmm. But there is sometimes a very fine line in a lot of areas of China, especially rural, mountainous areas, between farming village and bandit camp.
Yeah.
And,
it depends if the year is good or not.
It depends if the year is good or not.
If the rain is, sufficient this year.
And there's lots of places where, when no one's looking, they'll just go down and do a little bit of raiding, rob some caravans on the road.
Yeah.
And Turnip Pass is supposedly one of these places.
Yes.
And,
but I feel like the idea, though, that they were trying to say is, even though Judge Dee was the local official of this, neighboring county or neighboring area.
There is geographic separation of power.
Yes. Yeah. He has no power in this region.
No.
He must go to the officials in that region, ask for power.
Yes.
Right? Like, get support and all that.
But they think, we'll talk about this, but so there's a local garrison, which you think kind of like police, mm-hmm. but there's also the military. there. Yeah. And they first go, why don't we talk to the garrison? We'll get them to help us. And then they say, I quote, the local garrison is there stationed to prevent the local people from creating disorder on a large scale rather than guarding the passes.
They're not. Yeah.
You can assume the district magistrate, so the Judge Dee of that region, is content at leaving that crowd of robbers in the passes well alone as long as they don't rebel or refuse to pay their taxes.
Yeah. See, they don't do law enforcement unless it's specific laws.
Yeah.
For example, tax paying.
And if there's travelers going through and they rob them, well, hey.
They don't care.
They don't care, right? They don't live here, right?
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah.
So they go, okay, well, what about the military? There's military up there too. And then somebody tells them, you fellows may be strong and good fighters, but in this you're extremely new. Listen to an old man grown gray in official service. That garrison commander is either getting a share of the loot or is completely satisfied with his easy life there.
Yeah.
If he has you flogged as troublemakers and sends you back to Chongping, you'll be lucky. So they're like, okay, there's corruption, right?
Yeah.
It's just bandits there. Nobody really wants to deal with it because it's going to be more trouble than it's worth. The only person who's going to care is Judge Dee.
Yeah.
He can't let it go because he's Judge Dee. Yeah. So they decide to entice the tiger out of the mountains.
Yeah.
That's the strategy. So basically they go up there and they decide, okay, we'll feed Xiao this BS story. We'll get him to come down and then we'll arrest him when he's away from his crew up in the mountains. And so they go up there. I just thought this part was funny. So they go up there and Zhao basically gets into an argument with somebody in the village, and the guy attacks him while Zhao is like carrying a bunch of stuff in his hands. And it says, I quote, Zhao could not use his hands because he was still carrying his bundles, and a lesser man would have fared badly in the situation. But Zhao, being an expert boxer, just lifted his right foot and placed it accurately in the other's groin. The ruffian just gasped and doubled on the floor moaning. Zhao grinned and said, now you see what a beginner you are in this game, you dog's head. This time I shan't beat you to a pulp here, but next time you meet a stranger who asks you a polite question, remember to keep a civil tongue in your mouth. And I was just thinking, like, yeah, he's an expert boxer, and he kicked him in the crotch. That's a real expert move right there.
It worked.
It worked.
And he gave him a moral lesson as well.
Yes. Yeah. But it even gets more complicated because they can't just get the local magistrate to help them arrest a criminal. They have to tell the local magistrate, they basically have to present the situation so that the local magistrate can report, I'm such a good magistrate, I'm arresting criminals from other regions and helping out. Otherwise, they're not going to do anything. And they also have to like pay some bribes to people in order to get the guy out of there. But eventually, they get Xiao out and they bring him back to Chongping to face trial for murder. He refuses to confess to murder of the two men. They give him the screws, which are like a vice you can think of. They like put their hands in it and they like crush their hands.
Again, described in gruesome detail.
Yes. And we're not even getting into it, but sometimes Judge Dee will just have a hunch. And he'll think, I think that person's involved.
And he will just torture them.
He'll say, I know you did it. And they go, I didn't do it. And he goes, oh, yeah? And then they'll beat them. And then they'll go, I know you did it. And they go, no, I really didn't do it. He'll go,
do you want more of this?
And sometimes he'll go, okay.
If they don't give up after the torture, he goes, maybe they are innocent.
Maybe they are innocent.
But it's okay that I tortured them. It must have, it must be done.
Well, and we'll get in. Well, there's one caveat, which is apparently, so you're the district magistrate. You have a huge level of stuff you can do. But if you do beatings or tortures, or you torture somebody to death, and it turns out you can't pin a crime on them, then you can be in big trouble. Because now you're seen as just killing people, and people will write letters up to the official above you. There'll be investigations that happen. So you have to kind of know.
Well, you can't take a life back.
Yes.
But people can heal.
Yeah.
I don't know, a broken hand. So what?
And I think, that's why the bamboo is like, you're not going to be maimed from the bamboo. So it's like, you can't just like break somebody's legs because then they can't work anymore. And now you're doing permanent harm.
But otherwise, you
go hog wild.
A beating is just free.
Yes. And if you look at the Qing law code, which apparently was based off the Ming law code, which again is based off of like the Ren law code and based off the
There's
Song law code.
There is of course, there are variations throughout the dynasties, and they make changes, they add things, they take things out. But the principle, especially in the penal code, it's you can do whatever you want. It's pretty consistent.
It's like, oh, you talk back to a judge, 50 strokes.
Yeah.
And so really, there's a lot of leeway for the judge to they can beat you for whatever they want. Up to a certain degree.
Yes. If they killed you over no reason, or they can ping a crime on you, that's a different. They might get they might be consequences.
And there are imperial investigators who can come down and investigate stuff. But anyway, so Xiao goes, oh, I'm not a silk merchant. You have the wrong guy. So they bring in the innkeeper, and he goes, yeah, that was the guy who stayed at my inn. He's got the same like black tooth. So he still refuses to confess. Judge Dee bangs his fist on the table and shouted in a thundering voice to the constables to apply, quote unquote, the great torture. Yeah. Which I don't know the exact legal separation between the great torture
and regular torture.
But I think the great torture is stuff that permanently maims you and could kill you. Okay. And I think everything before that is just the torture.
So what you don't want to do until you are pretty sure you got the criminal.
Yes. Yeah. Because there's a chance that they could die from it.
Yes. And also, can we just say that the reason is that he thinks he's got the guy, but it's important that they confess.
Yes.
Because you can't just
And again, this seems strange to me. Yeah. I'm in some ways taking Van Gulik's word for it, but that you really can't sentence somebody of a crime unless they confess. And so part of the torture is you make them confess, and that it's like, well, if they don't confess, you just bring them out every day and torture them more.
Yeah, until they confess.
And I'm sure sometimes they do it anyway. But I mean, the idea is that everyone's watching. You know, you have all of these onlookers from the town all watching the trial. Yeah. And they want to see the person go, yes, I did it. It was me. So they're applying the great torture, which in this case is they take like chains and they put them in a fire, and then they put the chains on the floor and they make the guy kneel on the chains, right? That are like burning. Yeah. So eventually this makes him confess. He asks for mercy though, since he has his mother to support still. Yeah. Judge Dee shakes his head. Luo Gongqi and the Carter Wang, who are the two people he killed, have parents to support as well. I rule that in this particular case, this circumstance shall not be considered. Yeah,
I remember that.
And it's like, well, it shouldn't be considered by him, right? Yeah. So he goes, no, I rule that I will not consider it.
This court will not
consider it.
This. It's not an
plea
evidence.
for mercy.
Yeah.
He does, however, show mercy to the village warden because he says, I already beat you 200 times. Yeah. I guess you had enough.
Well, also, the warden doesn't lose his job, by the way.
No, the warden keeps his job.
The warden goes back to being a warden.
Judge Dee says, you better watch it, mister. Yeah. If I get one whiff that you did something up, I'll be down there again to give you more beatings.
I know, but not a fireable offense.
No, apparently
beatable
not.
Offense.
Yeah. Yeah. As this is getting resolved, there's a new death that comes to the tribunal, which is the death of the poisoned bride, which basically a lady dies on her wedding night, and the two families can't agree to what happened. It turns out somebody poisoned the tea, and the one part I think is funny is, there's no crime lab, there's no like chemistry kit, so how do you find out the tea's poison? Yeah. Judge Dee goes, somebody go find me a dog.
They find a dog on the street as if just, like they're just roaming around. Yeah. There's just plenty of dogs to be readily like, as little.
Nobody wonders if the dog belongs to somebody.
No one.
No. Yeah. And they bring a dog and they feed the tea to the dog and the dog dies. And they go,
like, yeah, this is poison.
Tea is poison. Yeah. That's our chemistry lab there.
Yeah, that's the little lab rat.
Yeah. Yeah. And my assumption again is also because this is probably written by a magistrate who understands this might not be an uncommon thing for them to test if stuff's poisoned, is to feed it to a dog. Yeah. In real life. So again, we're not going to talk about that case. It's it's the shortest one in the book, but you should read the book because
we would recommend the book.
It's wacky. Yeah. So Xiao, the Silk Road murderer, is sentenced to death, but the emperor has to approve the capital punishment. There are basically 5 common punishments, apparently called the 5 punishments in Imperial China. And sometimes the 5 will change. Sometimes like what the 5 are will change, but there's usually 5 official big punishments.
Okay.
But others can be assigned. These are beating with the light bamboo, 20 to 100 strokes. Beating with the heavy bamboo.
Yeah.
Forced labor, exile, and death. And the death can be in advancing order of how bad it is. It's strangulation, which is you're like somebody fancy, they just strangle you, because that way it doesn't mutilate your corpse.
Yeah.
There's decapitation, where they'll stick your head on a spike, and do that.
Yeah.
And then there's lingqi, which commonly known in the West as death by 1,000 cuts.
Yeah.
Which people just think that's a saying, but no, it's an actual punishment.
Yeah.
Where they, cut off a little, turkey deli meat slice.
Well, we don't. Yeah, oh my God.
At a time.
Was that necessary?
a little.
Thanks.
A little salami at a time until the person dies.
I will not be having salami anytime soon.
Yeah. So in this case, they charged the guy with decapitation.
Yeah. The dual murder killer.
The dual murder killer. And there's also 2 other people at the end of the book who get charged for things from the middle case, which is the strange corpse case.
Yeah.
And one of them gets strangulation because they're like a rich kid, basically. So they get off easy. They get strangled.
Yeah.
And one gets death by 1,000 cuts.
Yeah.
But
the woman gets the death by
1,000 cuts.
Worse than the double murderer.
Yeah, worse than the double murder.
She was a single murderer.
Yeah. She gets death by 1,000 cuts. But mercifully, apparently there's a variant of it where you get death by 1,000 cuts, but you get killed by the first cut.
Yeah. They kill you first,
and then they
do the whole thing.
Carving.
Yeah. So there's less suffering.
Yes.
But the humiliation must remain.
Yeah, and there's sort of an idea again. I mean, it's of sort of like in Christianity, you're supposed to be buried whole. You're not supposed to be cremated. That the state of your body in some way carries over into the next life. And so death by 1,000 cuts or decapitation is seen as a worse punishment than just getting strangled.
Well, I think not just in Christianity, it's the same in China.
Yeah, I know. I'm saying like in Christianity.
Oh, like in Christianity. Okay.
In China. And also it's like, if you have a family, they want to be able to bury you and put you in a casket and not, put a bag of hamburger meat in there.
Thanks again.
So it's,
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess it's a good.
I mean, this is just from the novel, Cherry.
That's what I'm saying. It's good preparation for reading the book.
Yeah. If you don't want to hear about somebody getting turned.
Well, it's only at the end. Yeah. It's not the whole book. Don't write off the book because of one. You can skip
over the punishment part.
Yeah.
If that's bothering you.
Yeah.
And again, these are fake stories, so it's not like we're describing a real person this happened to. Judge Dee's real.
It did happen to real people.
That's true. It was
These
a real
punishments,
death.
many.
Well, yeah, I mean, stuff like lingqi, there's even pictures of it because it was so...
Oh.
The Qing Dynasty did it, right? So there was people who took photographs of it.
I think they did it... Actually, they didn't do it that much in the Tang Dynasty, which is one of the reasons why this novel...
Yeah.
The Chinese version of it even, it's still a fiction. Because it blends a lot of like the official, like the government, like management... rules, the capital punishment rules. I think blends the actual rules from the Qing Dynasty and the Tang Dynasty. A lot of things they describe did not necessarily happen in the Tang Dynasty.
Because they don't really know.
Yeah. So they used their experiences and what they know from the current government system.
From the Qing and Ming Dynasty.
And the laws and
I think
applied it there.
lingqi, I think it only started like in the Ming Dynasty or something. Like it's not that long.
Well, I mean, people, cut people into pieces is always
draw and quartering. It's
the oldest punishment, like since human history. But I think as an official like capital punishment, it did only get popular is the wrong word.
And I don't want to make it seem like this is some barbaric. I mean, it is barbaric, but like Europe had the same stuff. They would have long, drawn-out executions in a square. I mean, things like
look at all the torture chambers in all those castles.
Yeah, I mean, things like the guillotine. are supposed to be like the humane option, right?
Right.
That's why they were created. It's like it's the new socially acceptable. It's the woke execution method.
I think what you're trying to say is these punishments are not necessarily the only ones with Chinese characteristics.
No, but
it's a human condition.
It's a human condition.
We are cruel.
But
Chinese detective novels, though, descriptions of capital punishment in them is a characteristic.
But Judge Dee does show mercy.
Yeah.
So one person, they committed a murder, and the mother-in-law was basically living in the same house and didn't realize it happened.
Yeah.
And Judge Dee said, "You failed in your duty of supervising the conduct of your daughter-in-law, and subsequently 2 heinous crimes were committed in your house. In view of the fact, however..."
One crime is the murder. The other one was that she was sleeping with It's a criminal offense.
Yeah.
At the time.
Adultery.
So,
however, that you are by nature an extremely stupid woman and that you have the victim's daughter to support, I shall let you go free.
Yeah. And she's like, "Oh, thank you, Judge. You're such a savior."
Judge Dee really calls that, this is part of the case we're not talking about, but there's this one mother-in-law, and Judge Dee every time he's like, that lady's stupid.
Yeah.
Judge Dee.
Also, can I just say, Judge Dee cannot, like, men in this, of course, Judge Dee is the man in the story, right? So he cannot look at one woman without making a judgment
of how hot they are, how bettable they are.
And it's not great.
No,
I mean it's terrible. It's not great. It's an understatement.
And that's actually one thing. Unfortunately, Robert Van Gulik carries on into his later novels.
Yeah,
every woman, Judge Dee's like, "Oh, she's older, but I'd still do her." Or like,
he doesn't say that, but
he does in the later now. He's like,
"Oh, he does."
Well, he'll be like, "Oh, she's good."
Not in this book, but yeah.
But he'll definitely mention how hot every woman is.
Yeah. So these literature work, because I know they're written into like drama and operas and stuff.
Yeah.
The moral lesson of how a woman should behave is it's heavy.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk about the later novels too, which I think are based off of cases. But so their punishments are carried out at the end of the book. Mm-hmm. Heads put on the gate. It's all a very public spectacle. People are carried around the town in a cart with a placard on them saying what they're guilty of and their crimes, which actually also was in the was portrayed in the Opium War movie we watched.
Yeah. Well, I mean that is a very common Chinese period drama as well.
Because again, it's supposed to be a public spectacle. The magistrate needs to show the public
justice is being done. But it's also a lesson for the common people. Like, don't do what they do.
Yes. Well, so this is a quote from the novel.
Don't commit adultery because it's a criminal offense.
So there's these young people who are like jeering at the criminals. And this old guy turns to the young people and says, "Don't use your tongue to revile them. Use your brains and reflect on the stern retribution meted out to criminals by the laws of our land. Here you see a violent ruffian, a depraved nobleman, and a lascivious woman, all together as equals in the card of the condemned. Justice has no regard for rank, position, or sex. Let this spectacle serve you as a warning, and always remember it should temptation come your way."
Well, I would say she's the only one who got the lynch. But
it does have a regard for sex.
Yeah. Or class, because the rich kid is the only one who got to keep his body full.
And you know why?
Yeah.
Because of the service his father has done to the state.
Oh my God, yes.
Because he's got a rich dad.
Yes.
There's a very lengthy process where there's like three pages where they go, okay, well, this guy we killed, we confiscated his estate, we sold it for this much. There's this much silver. We're going to give this much to the victim. Yeah. This much to that guy. This much to that guy.
They detail every single, like...
the jailer gets some.
Yeah.
Everybody gets a cut, right?
Yeah.
And then, because it's like, because I guess you're reading this, you're like, what's Judge Dee going to do with all that property? And I guess the assumption is, in the same way, whenever they go to an inn, they describe, and then they paid for the bill.
Yeah.
Because the assumption is like, otherwise they're just going to steal it all. Mm-hmm. At the end, Judge Dee gets promoted and goes to the capital, which apparently is common in these stories. Mm-hmm. But I want to talk briefly about the second case.
Okay.
So basically, the second case, real quick, Judge Dee in his little disguised wanderings finds out that this young, healthy man died mysteriously a year ago.
A promising young man.
And he becomes convinced that the widow killed him, that his wife killed him.
Yeah. he's like, this lady is so hot.
Yeah, he also says she's real hot.
Yeah.
And there's all these tops and turns, but they dig up a coffin.
Yeah.
Of his corpse, which the family does not want to do, but he does it against the family's wishes.
Yeah. Which was a bold move, because he can't find anything eventually, he's going to be in trouble.
And also, there was no problem. Nobody had run the gong. There was no report of this.
No, he seeked it out.
He's creating trouble for himself.
Yeah.
In a way.
Yeah.
Because he could have just left it alone, but he's Judge Dee, so he can't. So they even dig up his corpse, and they ask the corpse, blink if you were murdered.
No, the corpse's eyes were open.
Oh, open, and he says,
close your eyes if you were murdered.
Okay. So and then the corpse closes his eyes.
Also, the grave, there was no gravestone for this guy. So they were like, how do we even find his grave?
Yeah.
And there was this dark, this gray wind swirl around and led them there.
Yeah. So Judge Dee.
Oh my God.
Also, he has dreams that give him prophecies, and he. There's all sorts of shenanigans. There's spiritual things.
The supernatural element is, I would say it's not light-handed.
No, but the corpse closes his eyes, and everybody sees it, and everyone goes, oh. But then they do an autopsy. They can't find it was poison. They can't figure out what it was.
Yeah. And it's like, if you already, the dead, the ghost.
Yeah.
You already, the murdered man. You already spoke. Why don't you just help him out a little bit more?
No, Cherry. They can't. He can only close his eyes. That's all he can do.
Okay.
And... so he brings the ex-wife, the widow in, does stuff, beats her, does torture.
Yeah.
And he can't get anything out of her.
No.
And he's like, oh, well, the ghost, closed his eyes. And she's like, oh, yeah, well, is the ghost going to come in here and testify? And I'm thinking, not knowing anything, maybe the ghost will come in and testify. Yeah. But no, the ghost can't.
No.
The ghost is not legally admissible. No. So he tortures her and all this stuff. And he even's like, okay, you can go. And she's like, no, I'm going to stay in this jail. And
You're going to be in trouble.
And I'm going to be in your face.
Yeah.
Because, I'm innocent. And you're going to lose your job.
Yeah.
And I'm going to just keep raising hell.
Yeah. Lady's got guts.
For wasting my time. And I was like, okay, damn.
Yeah.
And Judge Dee's like, oh, man, maybe
I'm wrong.
Maybe I'm wrong. And he's thinking and he even writes the letter where he's explaining hey, you're going to get a complaint from this lady.
I'm wrong. I'm going to resign.
Yeah,
it's
I'm
all
wrong.
my fault. I'm so sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you want the conclusion of that, you're going to have to read the book. But, I thought it was funny that it's unlike something like Sherlock Holmes, it's if Sherlock Holmes is wrong, he still can be a consulting detective. Right. But for Judge Dee, it's
he loses his job.
Story
stops there.
Story stops there. Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's sort of I think it's supposed to be a lesson in the perils if you're a judge. It's you got to be careful, opening up cans of worms.
Yeah.
Because once you start it, you can't put it back until there's a resolution.
It's pretty plain of a lesson because different people.
Judge Dee, you shouldn't have done this.
Yeah. Different people, people under him, talk amongst themselves. They're like, oh no, he's going to get into trouble. He's found nothing so far. Why did he even do this?
Yeah. Maybe
no one complained.
Just give the lady some money and, she'll let it drop or something.
Yeah.
But no, he can't let it drop.
Well, he's Judge Dee. He found her out.
So that's the story. And I think it's, if you're interested in, obviously it's fictional, but it is written by, theoretically, people think it was written by a magistrate or an ex-magistrate in the imperial system. It's fun. It's got lots of good details. You get to see how the sausage is made. There's good mysteries. I highly recommend it.
Yeah, take it with a grain of salt.
Take it with a grain of salt, but it's fun.
You're not going to be happy with the treatment of women in the book.
No, well, we'll get into this, but so...
We always haven't gotten into this.
No,
There's something.
Talk about the later novels.
Oh wow. Okay.
So the later novels, I've read 4 of them. I think there's 13 that
Okay.
Van Gulik wrote.
Right.
And I feel like the women's stuff is worse than these.
Oh, let me brace myself.
Well, because it's it's one thing if it's written by a guy in 1710, right? Yeah. And Van Gulik is translating it. It's another thing if it's written by Van Gulik in 1965. And obviously, some of it is it's still Imperial China. You can't write you can't write a woman as a Confucian scholar because they're not going to let her be one.
You think part of it is maybe he was trying to stay true to the reality of the time of the story?
Yeah, I don't want to make excuses for him, but
okay.
So
that's what I'm trying to do.
Well, I think he was, but I'm going to if you read them.
Okay.
You can draw your own opinions.
Okay.
So these they start from when Judge Dee was first a magistrate up until the end of his career.
Okay.
He thought, English people aren't going to read these, but maybe Chinese and Japanese people will. So he originally wrote them all in Chinese and Japanese, and then later he found a Western publisher. So really, interestingly, the English version of these novels is the translated one, and the Chinese version is the original. Did he
translate himself?
I think so. I think he translated them all himself. And also he did his own woodcut drawings. So the later novels have woodcuts.
Yeah.
And he said he drew the woodcuts, which is kind of funny. So
well, he had a lot of time.
He had a lot of time. The actual original book, half the woodcuts are him and half of them are originals.
Original prints.
From, novels and stuff he found. So Judge Dee is a much cooler figure in these. He's much more of a protagonist, and much more of an active role. He's buff. He's an expert in sword fighting.
Yeah, which is not you see, the original historical character now transforms into a fictional character.
Yeah, and even in the novel, like the translated novel we just talked about, Judge Dee doesn't do anything remotely active. No, he goes around and his little lieutenants do stuff.
Right.
I mean, he's a medicine seller as his thing, but he's not getting into fist fights.
Yeah.
So
now we have like wuxia stories.
Now we have like wuxia Judge Dee.
Yeah.
He's real good with the ladies. He's still wrong a lot, as we talked about. Sometimes he'll bring people in and accuse them of stuff and find out he's wrong. He gets mad and frustrated, and sometimes will, insult people, or he'll accuse people on a hunch to see what happens.
Right. So
they're not like sanitizing the character.
Right.
He's still in some ways kind of a jerk. I read 4 of them. So yeah, I want to say briefly on the women.
Okay.
So I do get the problems if you're writing a story in Imperial China and you need to involve women, because women aren't allowed to do anything. Like if you're either a wife and you live a relatively cloistered existence.
Yeah.
You're a young woman who hasn't gotten married yet. And
you're a sex worker.
Or you're like a sex worker, essentially. Or you're like a peasant woman who have a little bit more freedom.
Yeah, actually, yeah.
Yeah,
your
right.
Feet is not bound. It's not.
Your feet aren't bound. You got to work. You got to do stuff. You got to go in the village to buy things.
Yeah.
But if you're like a rich, posh woman in a town, you have very limited options. So a lot of the women are either victims, like the bride got murdered, or they get kidnapped, or they're evil, or they're like somehow involved with the sex industry. Yeah. Either courtesans or prostitutes or
they're
whatever.
Caricatures.
Yes.
They're one-dimensional characters. Yes. That's just, I mean, there are men who are caricatures too, right? But Judge Dee himself, the man, it gets to be a full-fledged three-dimensional hero, sometimes flawed hero, and so still supposedly lovable. And his
lieutenants do too.
Yeah, right. So I mean,
so though I will say, Judge Dee, for the time, is supposed to be is somewhat of a feminist for the time, and interestingly, he's enough of one that in the author notes for the later novels, Van Gulik defends Judge Dee. Because, for example, there's one case, I think this is in the Chinese gold murders, where a woman gets kidnapped and assaulted like a week after she gets married. Yeah. And then they find her and they rescue her. And then immediately her husband's like, well, how do I know? She was really assaulted. And it's like, and they prove it. And he's like, well, she should have killed herself. Yeah. That's what a proper woman would have done. Yes. I don't want her back. Yeah. And then her dad is like, well, I don't want her back either. She's soiled now. Yeah. And then Judge Dee's like, well, okay. And he talks to her and she's like, well, I guess I'm supposed to kill myself, but I don't really want to die. Yeah. Even though this terrible thing happened to me. Like, I want to keep living. Yeah. And Judge Dee's like, okay, I'll find you like a job, like in my house. Yeah. So muddying the waters in a later novel, Judge Dee marries her. So yeah, she becomes his third wife. So
a third one. Okay. Yeah. Well, okay, so you're saying it's not, they do try on some aspects, even though the effort, we can't say that the effort is enough. No. Because it's not.
Yeah, but I mean, it's the 60s, right? So like.
Yeah. And also like the whole thing about, as a woman, you get raped, you're supposed to kill yourself. Yeah. No one's going to take you back, even though you're a victim.
And that's not just a Chinese thing, right? That's a lot of traditional societies.
Yeah, and that's the harsh reality of
Yeah.
Maybe even the 1960s.
Well, though, I mean, I guess if you think of it that way, the fact that he marries her means that Judge Dee doesn't think that she's like been dishonored by this.
Sure. Judge Dee, the three-dimensional character.
The feminist. Interestingly, though, how it's framed, which again, I find is like Judge Dee has 2 wives, and then they're like, oh, we don't have that many people to talk to, and she's smart because her dad was like a Confucian scholar, and so you should marry her because then we can talk to her and we'll have other people. And I was thinking about, if you're like some rich woman, it's like you have very limited people, so it's like maybe you're happy your husband has multiple wives, because otherwise, like, who do you talk to, right? Like, you're just alone all day. But
monogamy is a modern construct.
Yeah. So he also seems fine with LGBT people, at least in the books I read. There's multiple
in the fictional version.
In Van Gulik's version. There's multiple gay characters that Judge Dee runs into, and he doesn't really seem to have a problem with it.
Yeah.
Kind of funnily, there's one character that everybody's like, oh, that guy, he's different. And then Judge Dee finds out he's gay, and he's like, these people are pretty prejudiced. Like, so what that the guy's gay? But it turns out he's actually like a were-tiger, and he like transforms in the full moon to like a tiger and attacks people, and that's why they don't like him. And
supernatural
like, oh, okay. Like,
yeah.
It's unrelated to the fact that he has a boyfriend.
Sure.
So, but and like just other stuff from one book, he has to foil a resurgence of the White Lotus Rebellion.
Oh, it's the White Lotus,
which is an on and off symbol of rebellions in China.
Yeah.
But interestingly enough, when he informs the capital and they send people out, he gets in trouble because they go, how dare you have a conspiracy to start with, right? How dare you even have there be a rebellion to put down? Yeah. Right? You should have not even
let this. It's your fault this even happened.
Your fault this has even happened, right?
It's your fault that I'm hearing about it.
That I'm hearing
Kill
about
the messenger.
This. Yeah.
Yeah.
And,
But doesn't that go to the theme of like, as the government, like the best thing is that there's nothing.
Yes.
The best situation is that there's not even a chaos to begin with. And if there is, you want to cover it up.
Yeah. Or you report that it's already been solved and you didn't need any help.
No.
And it was all good. Which again,
social harmony.
Coming off of like 4 episodes about the Opium War.
Yeah.
That's like
it's Chinese
to a T. It's like every official goes, nope, it's all good, Mr. Emperor. Like. Yeah. Everything's great, and then meanwhile everything's on fire and everything's
not all that different today.
No.
So
overall they're not as useful as a historical artifact as the first book. Van Gulik, in each book he writes like, oh, I was inspired by this book with this case for this murder. Yeah. So he does still draw from historical sources, but again, it is, it's less of a historical artifact.
Yeah.
But they're still fun. Probably worth taking a look at. But a product of their time, especially with women.
I want to add the women thing 100%.
Yeah.
I want to add a thought just from maybe like a minute back.
Yeah.
The whole like social harmony. Let's not report any problems until we have to. Mm-hmm. I was thinking the Chinese imperial system, or the whole like government setup is like, there's like no blame culture in modern tech companies.
Yeah.
The Chinese system is blame culture.
Yeah.
100% blame culture.
Yeah. And I feel like though, even in the original Judge Dee book, I think part of the system is like, it's one thing until there's a crime or there's an accusation or something happens. Mm-hmm. But once that's happened, it has to be somebody's fault.
Yeah.
It has to be somebody's fault. And somebody has to get punished.
Yeah.
And everything has a blame. Everybody has some fraction of responsibility for. Yeah.
It's not solution focused.
No.
It's punishment and blame focused.
And that's, I think, partially was the emphasis on confessions. It's like somebody has to take the fall for it.
Yes.
They have to go, it's my fault, right?
Yeah.
You
can't just go to trial because some, in modern, like even Chinese or Western. Actually, I don't know about Chinese, so if our listeners know about modern Chinese judicial system, let me know, because obviously in these like high-profile TV trials of like political figures and stuff, they always, they do
confess.
Well,
that's
on TV.
Again, I'm not an expert, but like I know the Japanese system.
Yeah.
I know more about the Chinese one, and it has like a super high conviction rate, and they basically
Well, they only charge you if you have confessed?
They very rarely actually let it go to a court, like with a jury and something. They almost always get the person to confess beforehand. Because the punishment if you don't confess is like way, way, way worse. So they'd rather just have it be cut and dry. You confess and they move on, right? Than like have a lengthy trial. But anyway, why don't you talk a little bit about, so Judge Dee, not just a historical figure, not just a literary figure from Qing Dynasty, Van Gulik, he's also a modern, I don't know, cultural icon might be strong, but
he is in pop culture. I think
at least as much as they like Sherlock Holmes in the West.
Yeah, I would say that. Yeah. So I want to go back to history just a little bit.
Okay.
More than the modern construct of Judge Dee. His story, obviously, he was a real person, and his story was recorded. His biography was recorded in history. Then I feel like his story, ever since that point, took on its own life. Yeah. It's a vessel, right? And throughout time, it has different meanings. Just like any body of literature work. Yeah. Once it leaves the author, it has a life of its own.
I mentioned Julius Caesar, but it's like, Shakespeare talks about Julius Caesar. There's the mythological character gets a life of its own outside of the historical one.
Yeah, and I think that's this character precisely, because the historical records aside, which provides a lot of details for people to interpret and as a jumping off point for these legends, in the Ming Dynasty, there was already an opera that tells his whole life story, right, in a very dramatic way. And then in the Qing Dynasty, the books we are talking about, the book we're talking about, that the only like official record or print we can find was published in 1890. And this one was interesting because we're talking about the Wu Zetian's 4 famous astonishing cases, which was written before, but there was a version that we can see today, which is from 1890. And this was the end, really late Qing Dynasty, almost over. Yeah. And this was, one second. And in some ways, this novel was very, very political because in the way, like as an example, in the way it portrayed Wu Zetian and her reign was very negatively. Yeah. And, readers are supposedly, or obviously we don't know who the author was, but critics think that it is aiming at the Empress Dowager Cixi, actually. So, one woman in power who's evil. Let's look at the one today. And that's a reflection of her. Do you want to say something?
No.
Okay. And as for him, so in the translation, in the English version we've read, right? That meaning, I don't know if it carries on because we no longer have a Qing Dynasty
I think we
don't talk about that part.
I think we skipped. I think you say the historical figure, and it's had an opera and all that, and then we talk about the modern day.
Okay.
I think it's too much to explain the 1890 versus the different translation versus parts of it are from this time, parts of it are from that time.
Okay, that was my main content.
I thought you were going to talk about like there's movies and there's
movies, but they're not that interesting.
I don't know, but you could at least mention it.
Okay. Should I start from the beginning?
No, I think start after the Qing Dynasty.
Okay. And as for Di Renjie, Judge Dee himself as a legendary detective, no longer the boring government administrator at this point.
I feel like the detective part has really taken over his administrative roles.
100% has, because he's known as Shen Tan Di Renjie, as in legendary detective Di Renjie. That's what he's known as. So in pop culture in China, that he really got famous after the 1980s, and thanks to these books that made their way back to China. Starting early 1980s, the books by him was translated into Chinese and starting to get published in magazines and then as books, and then TV shows were made about it based on his books.
Well, I think they were probably available in Taiwan and Hong Kong the whole time,
right?
But probably in the 80s is when they made it to mainland
China. Yeah. So then there were TV shows, there were movies, there were multiple movies, and he is just known as this wuxia legendary fictional character, and he's always like sort of young, and like very good at like very smart, very handsome, very charming. Nothing like the actual. Well, I don't know if he was charming, but it's God.
He's certainly not charming in the courtroom.
It's a different character now.
Yeah.
That has a life on its own. I wouldn't be surprised if they keep making more movies, because just like they keep making new Sherlock Holmes movies and works.
Yeah.
I think there will be more.
Yeah, and I do think it's interesting that this kind of, again, I mean, Van Gulik can only get so much credit because obviously it is a historical figure. People have liked writing about him for thousands of years.
Yeah.
But I do think it's interesting in some ways that the modern rendition of him is probably flavored a lot by stuff that Van Gulik
100%
made up.
No, the TV show that was made in the 1980s.
Yeah.
And when went all the way to the 1990s was based on his books.
Oh, okay.
That was the script. That was the
inspiration.
They don't say that they were not the inspiration. They were based on his books.
Oh, okay. Literally, okay.
Literally, yeah. They don't say it was based on the old town records.
Yeah.
So that's interesting to me.
Yeah. And that's one reason why I feel like, I'm not Chinese.
Oh, really?
I've never made that clear. But, you think like, oh, why are we even, obviously he translated the original book, but why even talk about the later books he wrote? It's just some Dutch guy writing. But clearly they struck a chord with at least some people.
Lots of people
in China, right? And so they're not, completely off the mark.
Well, I think they're good detective stories.
Yeah, they're fun. Yeah.
Scratch that, not good. Fun. Entertaining.
Yeah.
Because whether,
And I think they're particularly entertaining. Obviously, I think he wrote them to appeal to what he thought are Chinese sensibilities. For example, some of the woodcuts, they have women bare-chested. But he even wrote in the thing, he's like, I can't show the women's feet because then these books won't get published in China, which I think is, okay. Van Gulik, I think you're a little bit behind the times there.
Yeah.
But, to me, it's interesting because of the difference in the role of Sherlock Holmes can't bring people in and beat them, right? He can't, he doesn't have a crew to go send out and do stuff.
No, he's a lone wolf.
Yeah, he's a lone wolf. I guess he's got Watson, but.
Well, okay, sorry. But I'm saying they're both outside the system.
Yes. But Judge Dee is the system.
Yeah.
Right? It's the process of the system figuring out the crime.
Sherlock Holmes is more like detective novel, like the mystery solving.
Yes.
And Judge Dee is more like, this is how justice is done.
And it's almost
with some fun thrown in.
And it's also almost like it's proving. You read this and you go, I don't know if you're a townsperson in the Tang Dynasty and you go, our justice system's really good. Right?
Yeah.
You read it and you go, we really got this figured out, right?
It's a false promise.
Yeah.
Because obviously I have to see it as fictional work. If you read more into it, you go, the system balances itself out, which is the propaganda, right? You go, the good dictator theory, that, hey, even though he does all these things, but he's really good at dictating.
Detectiving? Investigating?
Detectiving.
Investigating.
Yeah, and then you go, that's how it worked back in the days. But that's not how it worked back. He's not supposed to, even in these novels, or the Qing novel, right? Yeah. The original one, he is not supposed to be one of the common registrars.
No,
he was not corrupt, which was unusual.
Yeah. He actually looked into things instead of just taking the word of whoever gave him the best, bribe or something.
Yeah, so maybe you can see him as a aspiration at the time to what the system can be.
Yes.
But still very flawed. Like, you can torture people whenever you want, as long as they don't die.
Yeah. Though he does. When they dole out all the money at the end, sometimes some of the people who got beaten and didn't do anything, they get a little money.
Oh yeah, that makes it okay then. Yeah, totally.
Sorry, I broke your legs. Here's 20 silver.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I hope that was interesting to people. I think this was partially historical, political one, not just media. But next week we're going to talk firmly about a historical figure. So please look forward to that. And thank you for listening, everybody. We really appreciate it. Everyone who likes us on podcast things or sends us comments on Twitter or emails us.
We read them?
We read them.
Because there's thousands of them.
Thousands of them. It's hard. It's hard.
No, but we do appreciate it when we hear from you, which is,
It's the only reason we do it, is that hopefully somebody out there enjoys it.
Yeah. Well,
we enjoy it.
We want to talk about it too, these things. So thank you very much, and we will see you next time.
Thank you for listening.